David carefully watched the fight scenes for viability and more than a few times steered a flying sequence back to reality. The novel does not center on a single hero, but it does highlight two characters, rubber ducky pilots Ward Davidson and Reuben James, whose relationship and shared dangers provide an ongoing continuity from chapter to chapter. Although these two are not the heroes of the novel, they are heroes in the novel. Tune in to know and love. The authors with us tonight are, as I said, David Ward is a retired military and airline pilot, was born in Seattle in 1955. Didn't tell us what day, so you can't celebrate your birthday. And he moved to Enumclaw in 1961. He attended Central Washington University, where he majored in public health and business administration, and received his USAF commission through the ROTC while attending Central. David is now a retired Alaska pilot residing in Enumclaw, where he and his wife Kelly operate Feather Haven, their nonprofit native songbird rehabilitation facility. They rescue and rehabilitate songbirds of all types, and David was recently licensed to rehabilitate raptors. Ooh, yeah, I've seen it on TV, nature or whatever. Although David and his wife have no children, their lives are filled with animals. I just had to put this in, I thought it was pretty funny. Most of the rescue variety, helping to fertilize the farm, helping to fertilize the farm are 5 donkeys, 2 parrots, 1 bunny, and Rosie the greyhound, all rescues. Prior to working for Alaska Airlines, where he was a Czech airman and functional Czech flight pilot, David spent most of his Air Force time based in Charleston, South Carolina, assigned to Worldwide Airlift and a C-141 low-level special operations project. And we'll hear more about that. The C-141 operations flew covert missions in support of the Department of Defense operations around the world. In total, he has logged approximately 20,000 hours of flying time. When not caring for wild songbirds and raptors, he enjoys cooking. He also plays what he calls mediocre golf and flying his Piper Cub, a 1942 J5C. Jim Rubin, a retired Army warrant officer and military historian, lives in Bonnie Lake with his wife of 42 years, Barbara, who's here. She's here. They have 2 boys, long out of the house. After 32 years in the Army, active reserve, and Washington Army National Guard, including 2 years in Vietnam, Jim enjoys climbing and hiking in the Cascades, in better weather, I hope. His hobbies include woodworking, starting with building birdhouses for your guys' birds, for their church fundraisers. He also enjoys flying with David to local air shows. Although he worked as a vessel master in the military and in the merchant marine, he has always loved aviation. David, Roger, and Jim all retired on the same day in 2009 from 3 different occupations and knew then they would be lifelong friends. The book project made it possible for all of them to stay close in retirement. So please help me welcome David and Jim to Words Writers in Southwest.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for coming. It's dark. It's not yet stormy, but it will be. I'm David. Jim, of course. Roger's in Spokane, and for that and other reasons couldn't make it. But we'll cover all 3 of us in here a little bit more, and just want to thank you for coming. It's our first time doing this. It's a first book effort, writer's effort, and we did it across the state via snail mail, email, phone calls, and then the occasional get-together. So with that said, also like to thank Dorfay and Southwest Seattle Historical Society and Seattle Public Library for having us. So we'll talk about the book a little bit, we'll talk about us a little bit, and I want to talk about the process that we went through writing the book. Just if there are any aspiring authors, former authors, give you our experience about how it went. It's been several years in the making, and we think it came out really, really well. The book is just a fun read, and we'll talk about that. And Jim and I were sitting the other day, and we were about to part. We stopped at a place in Enumclaw and had a beer, and we were leaving, and Jim said, "It's not just a World War II book, Bill." And we said, "That's right. It's so much more than that. It is an aviation story because the three of us are aviation nuts. Myself, I made a living at it, Air Force and airlines, and I still fly around some. It's a lot of fun, but Jim's an airplane nut. I mean, he hears an airplane and he's in the bathtub. He runs out and sees what goes overhead. Barbara makes him come back in because he's naked.
Although he doesn't live on Magnolia, he'd be just standing out in the front yard around the clock. It's endless.
Right, it is in Magnolia. But it's an aviation story, and we both love aviation. And Roger, in fact, is an aviation nut to the point that every mission, every flight in this book series, and it is a series of 3, it's turning out to be a trilogy, every flight he flies on his Microsoft flight computer in real time. If it's a 3-hour flight, he flies the route for 3 hours. He does every flight in the actual airplane that we use, because that system on Microsoft, you can change airplanes. So he flies the actual airplane on the actual route and the actual mission. So it's very well researched in that regard. It's a military story. Jim and I were both former military. Roger taught English overseas to the military, and we're all military fans. I'm not going to read all these slides to you. You can read it, but it's about all that. Brotherly love, love of country, success, failure, lots of adventure, and personal friendships, camaraderie, military camaraderie, aircrew camaraderie. It's all there. And of course, World War II and the Nazi war machine. Heinous enemy, and had it not gone the way it did, human history would be different. We look at both sides of the war effort. Mostly, of course, the American side with the B-25 unit that we fly in. But also, Roger, in his writing, covered a lot of the German story from a German soldier's perspective. And like some of the little blurbs that you may have read and on back of the book, a lot of the Germans didn't follow Hitler to a T. They didn't feel very good about this. And there was a lot of things that happened in World War II on the German side that might surprise you. They're not all evil people during that war effort. There were some good things. Freedom isn't free. And there's a lot of heart, a lot of humor in the book, and in the context of World War II, the air base that we invented out of England, but they're all real places. It's all well researched, and I think you'll enjoy it. So we'll look at, I got a video up next, so everybody likes videos, and I do too, and it's got music and airplanes and everything. So we'll watch a video to get you, and yeah, I know, R-O-O-R-D, it's not a word. So how do you pronounce it? I don't know. You know, I call it ROORD. So just because it will tell you what it means, but it's basically an acronym for the Royal Order of the Rubber Ducks. And it's on a blurb up here. I think it tells. It stands for Reconnoitering, Observation, Opposition, Resources, Destruction. And that's the acronym that the powers that be that formed this unit in the book, a B-25 unit, prior to Americans actually joining the war effort. This was all covertly done before the war was actually officially had American involvement. So all this happened before. So Winston Churchill and Theodore Roosevelt, right, formed this unit at the time, and it was a secret unit. So the Americans being Americans, as the book mentions, changed the acronym that means all that stuff to Royal Order of the Rubber Ducks. So we have rubber ducks. They named all their airplanes after rubber ducks. Everybody got to name their own airplane, got to put their own nose art on the airplane featuring a rubber duck instead of Lana Turner or whatever most guys did in the war. But we'll look at some of those. But that's what it means, and I just call it ROORD. Whoops. We've got a couple of readings. They're reasonably short, maybe 5-6 minutes on the first one, about 3 pages that I'll do. And then a one later, if we have time, it's shorter, about a page and a half. We'll cover the people, that's me, Jim, and Roger. The history of how this got started writing this book. Just look real briefly at the trilogy. It is 3 books. The second one is about to go to print. The first one we're talking about is the Air War, the second one called the Land War, and then the third book in the trilogy is the Secret War, which after the close of World War II kind of began the Cold War, and the Soviets going out into the world trying to take the pieces that were left and control them all. So the Cold War started, and afterwards Theodore Roosevelt said, let's take these rude boys and use them around the world to our benefit. So that's what the third book's about. And it's really cool. Jim and I are both halfway through the second book doing the final proof, and we were talking the other night, it's better than the first book. It's just really, really good. We'll cover a little more on Roger himself, the process we went through in getting these chapters written, proofed, edited, to an editor, to the printer, and out in book form. And then what we went through as far as getting a publisher, getting an agent, which neither one worked, as many of you may know, if you try to write a book, and self-publishing, and what we did. We'll look at the B-25, which we chose to use in this book. One more short reading, and then I've got a slide at the end. I kind of wanted to get a feel or express what this book felt like, to me anyway, and I think Jim agrees, and I compared it to some World War II movies that you may have seen, that the parallels are very close in some ways. So we'll just go over that. And if you do have questions during this, and there's a good place, just raise your hand, I'll answer them. Otherwise, we'll have questions at the end. Yes, sir?
But this is a novel.
It is a novel.
Well, how much of it will be factual, actual bona fide facts from World War II? And
Much of it.
then what liberties, at what point do you take the liberties with the facts? And
Right.
how does that affect the fact? How are we to follow what's real and what isn't?
As Rogers likes to say, a lot of it we made stuff up. I mean, it's a novel. It's a fictional novel. However, Roger is kind of a military historian. Jim is also. And they love military history. So as you go through this book, you'll see that the timeline, the time frame, the major battles as you go through World War II, everything's correct.
Then how do we know what isn't?
You'll know.
Oh.
You'll know. Everything having to do with the airplanes and ROORD itself is, we made stuff up. It's a novel. However, in that context, Roger will write about this campaign in the war. D-Day is covered, it's book 2. All of that is brought into actual factual context, and then he brings in the other guys to fight the battle. And you'll just know as you read it that this is the actual World War II timeline. These are the battles they're talking about, and they were real. These are the German commanders, these are the American commanders, Rommel in North Africa, Montgomery, all of that is mentioned in factual fashion, and then we make stuff up. It's very clear when you read the book that this is the story, and oh, by the way, these are the pieces of the war that happened in this timeline that are real. and he mentions all the real people in the war, in those battles. Winston Churchill, Theodore Roosevelt, Churchill's people, and the commanders on the ground in the land battle, especially in northern Africa, but also in D-Day and the beach
What
landing.
was the timeline of Theodore? I thought he was
It's Franklin.
well prior to.
I'm sorry, did I say Theodore?
Yes.
Yeah, Franklin Roosevelt.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, there's two of them.
I wonder how the Rough Riders got into
Good,
World War
yeah,
II.
good thing never mind.
Additionally, at the end of the war, when we continue on into the Cold War, you meant to say Harry Truman.
Right.
Yeah. I thought somebody might notice that, but
Well, it's
honestly,
a novel, he can make anything.
yeah,
up.
no. But I will tell you that, say at Normandy, for instance, you have, the ships are there, the battleships firing gun support, the Texas and the other ships, they're firing on the right beaches, they're firing at the right targets. The units that are landing on the beaches with the amphibians, the LCVPs, the right units, the casualties that they're sustaining are all pretty
All
well
factual.
depicted accurately. And all that's happening that is different is the insertion of this B-25 squadron, a small squadron, doing specific things that they were asked to do, specific targets they were asked to take out. They don't take out, you know, a major target that you know was taken out by something else. It's another battery that really wasn't there, and the Ducks come in and nail that one, or they help out an RAF unit that's doing something. It's kind of like that, so it's just kind of folding in this unit into actuality, and we try to get that thing just as close as we can possibly get to the accurate history, and give those units credit for what they did during the war, and make it as good a reading as we can.
And can I ask one more question? I think I'm familiar with the B-17, B-24. The B-25?
We'll cover that,
Okay.
the airplane itself.
Yeah.
And actually, Roger, when he started this process, he said, hey guys, what do you think we ought to fly? And I remember the choices were B-24, B-25, and what was the other one? Was it B-17?
We might have gone with the Invader, but it wasn't out yet, the B-26.
Okay, B-26 Invader, but, so we chose
B-20
this
Havoc.
airplane because it's amenable to being changed into, and we'll talk about this a little bit, the J model, which is a gunship as opposed to a bomber itself. It's more of a ground support attack aircraft. Doesn't drop bombs, it supports ground actions and so on. The B-25 J model, and I'll show you a picture of this with the guns on it, has up to 18, actually up to 20 50 caliber machine guns that can all operate from that one airplane. It's a lot of firepower. But in terms of what's real, what isn't, what he said. He did good. This is a little video. It's about a minute 15 or something, but it's pretty cool. This was done by Ted, is it Wolfgang or Wolf?
Ted, yeah, Wolfgang.
Ted did this. It's CGI stuff, you know, but for an amateur, it's really pretty. It's, anybody a pilot in here? Okay, good. Because this is a formation flight, and if you're a formation pilot, you'll see some things you don't really like, but it's really, and I flew formation a lot, in big airplanes and little airplanes, and I love it, so it's cool. B-25s, this is the unit, the ROORD unit.
But the terrain,
The Alps. You'll see that sign one more time in this at the end of the other video. That is a sign that in the book that the guys made for the air base. Just cobbled together, but it turned out pretty nice when Ted did it. So I'll do a reading here. I hope it's not too long. I might truncate it just a little bit. The B-25, that's our airplane, is wounded. The German is it, Jim, is it Junkers or Junkers? Or?
I call it Junkers, and I might be wrong.
Junkers 88. It's a twin-engine night fighter, very similar in configuration to the B-25, but that's the setup. We had fallen into a trap meant to draw us into a firefight, and 3 of the flight crew on the airplane are nursing it back home, and the Ju-88's about a few miles back stalking them. They've got some flight control damage, they can't fly very well, and the left engine isn't running very well. Do this. This is the first few lines that I'll be reading. 50 minutes from British air cover, and with no warning, Devil Duck's left engine exploded. The cylinders blew as the rods ripped loose from their shafts. The propeller went runaway, and a ruptured fuel line spewed fuel in a vapor that lit off and left a thick trail of flame. The 2 pilots jerked forward like they had hit a wall. John Fargo in the turret slammed violently against the turret side. The plane bucked and slewed under the unequal thrust, losing speed and altitude abruptly. While Graven fought to regain control, Bradbury hit the big red feather switch and quickly ran the emergency engine shutdown procedure. Within a minute, the extinguisher had doused the flames, but not before the cables to the left wing aileron had been partially cut. And with an engine out and controls damaged, Devil Duck was no longer in an evenly matched race with its pursuer. It was simply prey. Gerbert Fry suddenly pointed forward. This is the German crew. Suddenly pointed forward. Got him, he said. It looks like it, Franz muttered. The American plane had blown an engine and was slowing and slewing. In a few minutes, they could attack. Franz's hands moved over the controls, resetting for combat. His gunners pulled back their cocking levers. Franz swung his plane to the right to approach the enemy from the best sight line and began his run. The American tried to counter zigzag but could not. His plane shuddered and resisted command, condemning its crew to fly slow and straight. A perfect target. Open fire, Franz shouted. He and nose gunner Fry simultaneously hit the firing buttons on their MG-81 machine guns. 2 lines of tracers reached out and raked the wounded American plane, cutting loose a multitude of tumbling fragments. He's hit. Stay ahead of him. Franz accelerated past the American starboard side to give the Junkers' other gunners a clear shot. Reinke Fuchs in the ventral gondola focused his paired guns on the enemy's dorsal turret, killing the gunner, whose blood painted the inner surface of the turret's plexiglass. Martin Goff targeted the cockpit, cutting through the fuselage, blowing out the cockpit instrument panel and striking both pilots. We've got him, said Goff. He is dead, said Fuchs. Franz banked the Junkers around in a tight circle and came up on the American again from the rear. The enemy gunship's fuselage had been ripped open from wing spar to tail. Large sections of skin tore from the top and ribs exposed. The left rudder had been entirely shot off. The left wing was holed from tip to root, with only the empty upper shell of the engine remaining on the wing. The upper turret was a bloody coffin, and the cockpit was peeled open on the right side to reveal an unconscious or dead flight officer, his shattered right arm showing bone and pendulating in the slipstream. The pilot in the left seat had been hit in the head and chest. The windscreen in front of him was partially blown out. Blood streaked across his face in the wind. Part of his sheepskin coat flapped from his chest. He was conscious, but obviously confused and concussed. His hands were on the yoke and one operational throttle stick, but it was a miracle he was still able to fly the plane. However, he was flying in the wrong direction, headed due west. If Franz did not shoot him down, it would not be long before the American disappeared forever over the endless reaches of the Atlantic. Franz looked over his shoulder at his bombardier, Gerbert Fry. He nodded toward the crippled plane, his eyebrows raised in question. Before the war, Fry had been at Tübingen studying theology. Franz knew the young man had quietly refused to join the Reich Church, not succumbing to the Führer worship mandated by that state-approved body. Franz trusted Fry's moral judgment. Fry returned Franz's look, and an unspoken agreement was reached. Nicht schieben, Franz said to his gunners. Don't shoot. He brought the plane up close to the shattered gunship on its port side. The wounded pilot turned his head to look at them without expression, probably in shock. Fry motioned with exaggerated gestures. Follow us. The pilot stared without reacting. Again, Fry gestured. Follow us. Taking a chance, Franz pulled his plane directly ahead of the American and rocked his wings. He eased back beside the gunship and Fry signaled again. This time, the American pilot slowly nodded. He understood. Franz pulled ahead of him and banked to the north. The American followed, glued to the guide plane, and they headed for the coast of England. An hour later, 4 Hurricanes came speeding toward them. Those are British interceptor fighter airplanes. An hour later, 4 Hurricanes came speeding toward them. Franz lowered his landing gear and guns to indicate lack of threat and stayed with the wounded gunship while the Hurricane pilots assessed the situation. After a tense minute, they seemed to understand. When he was sure the American was under their care, Franz raised his gear, guns still down, and gently banked back toward France. He held his breath, not confident that the British fighters would let him go, but they did. 2 Hurricanes stayed with him, one on either side, escorting him back to the demarcation line. There, the Brits saluted their German foe and peeled off, returning the chivalry they had witnessed from the German pilot. Sorry, I'm starting to lose my voice there. So that's just one of the scenes in there, and there are several, where the Germans showed some compassion, showed that it's not all like some of the movies from way back, that they were all just evil robots. They were not. They're humans too, and that's one of the places
and
where...
that's the fact or the fiction of the novel?
That scene is fiction of the novel. The fact that the Germans, some of them, were human is well documented.
And do you think that really could have happened?
Sure.
It did happen.
It did?
The B-17 coming out of Germany.
Right, correct.
Yeah, that German actually steered him, state gun right on his wing and steered him over toward England and really caught it when he got home. His unit was really upset with him for doing it, but
Yeah, I would think.
there was.
The Führer would not be happy.
Well, in fact, there is a scene in the book that kind of covers that, where the Luftwaffe, about, the writing was on the wall. The war was beginning to be lost by Germany. And there's a scene in the book where the Luftwaffe commander said, no more. No more letting parachutes go down to land and come back and fight us another day. No more. You will shoot the guy in the parachute. Against all normal humanity to do that. But the Luftwaffe commander ordered that in one of the scenes in the book. Again, fiction, but quite likely something like that happened. So that's the cover of the first book. That's a shot that our publisher had, and I've blown it up here afterwards. You can come up and read the back cover, and we actually brought some books if you'd like one. But Jim did the graphics on all our books, the nose art and so on. And this one in particular, Jim and I talked at length several times about what should, because Jim and I live reasonably close to each other. Roger, he's in Spokane, so we left him out of it. But I think we kind of together came up with a lot of this, and Jim would go home to his computer, which he loves, and plays and sent out practice covers, and we'd talk about it. But that's the final version that came up. Obviously, the duck transiting the moon is a big portion of it. One of the byproducts or benefits of doing the slideshow, I put it together, is you get to put stuff on the slide that he can't do anything about. So Jim Rubin, old guy, Dora Fay read the biography, you can read that, but that's Jim. Young guy. That's me sitting in the entrance to a Citation 10 over at Bremerton Airport. I asked the pilot, I was putting some people on that airplane, asked him to take my picture. It's the only one I could find of me. But another neat airplane. And then a really old guy, that's Roger. Roger and Jim and I have been friends for, I guess, what, 25 years at least.
Yeah.
Roger was our pastor in a church that we all attended in Buckley, and it's just been a long, great friendship. It's cliche, he'd give you the shirt off his back and more. Roger's just a sweetheart of a guy, very talented writer, and his favorite restaurant is Denny's, so go figure. They eat there every day. At least once.
At least once.
Right. But that's Raj.
He was actually in Vietnam. He was a college professor for the University of Maryland teaching the soldiers over in Nam if they wanted to get a degree while they were deployed.
So college level English. But he had always wanted to write a novel, and pastoral duties and everything else, life, he never took the leap. So finally he kind of, I think it was an age thing when he turned 65 or 70 or 90 or 100 or something. He said now or never. So he approached Jim and I.
You know he's going to see this, right?
I know. That's, why do you think I'm saying? And we all are, aviation history, military enthusiasts, and we all have this in common. So he approached us 4 or 5 years ago and said, what do you think, guys? Can we do this together? And here we are. So obviously, yeah. We ended up with this epic, and in the course of trying to figure out what to do with it, how to get it published, we ended up with an editor who I'll mention in a minute, and it's morphed into this trilogy, more reasonable, 250-page, 280 trilogy that's a little easier to read. And that's the trilogy there. The Air War, the Land War, the Secret War being the Cold War that occurred after World War II. And then we just heard about this Pacific thing. Roger asked, hey, if you guys are still having fun with it, I have an idea. And apparently, Jim, do you know this story real well?
I do. Someone at his church in Spokane read the book, and he said, I don't know if it was a father or an uncle. Anyway, in World War II, he joined the Navy, went through boot camp, became a destroyer sailor, was on the same destroyer all the way throughout the campaigns of the South Pacific, wrote letters back home religiously over and over and over. Finally got to Okinawa. The ship was hit by numerous kamikazes and sunk out from under him. And he was injured but survived. And when he got home, his parents gave him all these letters. And so they've had them in the family. And this relative that approached Roger said, this really is amazing. We shouldn't let this go. We should document this. So Roger's pretty excited about taking that and writing a detailed story of this guy's life as a destroyerman all throughout the war. This will not be fiction. The only thing, there'll be some little discussions between different guys and things like that. But basically based on his letters of the day-to-day ongoing relationships on the ship and the things that they went through together on the ship. So that's pretty exciting. So, and I'm a mariner, so I think it's really exciting.
So Roger's the primary author, another flattering picture of Roger. And when we started this, Roger said, we want to do this together. And it became clear, Roger, he wanted all three of our names on the cover and we're all the authors. Well, baloney, we're not. We're on the cover, Roger's the author. And Jim and I, over the years, very, very involved with editing, proofing, storyline input, all of that, but Roger's the main author. We've covered his teaching English. Dennis Held is the gentleman's name in Spokane. I think the name of his company is Fine Line. Excuse me, editing. Did a marvelous job editing this epic down to 3 books. Russ Davis is the publisher, printer. Gray Dog Press, they do a marvelous job. He's worked with us and it's been just great. So, and Justin, and do you know how to say his last name? I don't either. It's Roger's adopted grandson. He's doing the marketing for us. He's a sharp marketing kid, just out of college, and the energy of a 21-year-old, because that's what he is. But Roger and he have formed this grandfather-grandson relationship that's worked really well. Trudy is Roger's wife. They both attended Princeton Theological Seminary. That's where they met?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. And graduated together, and she's behind-the-scenes support. So does everything behind the scenes, including when Roger goes off the rails and Jim and I are afraid to mention it to him, Trudy puts him back.
Yeah.
Tells him what he should do. And I mentioned that he flew every flight real time. So a little of the process, what we went through. Roger would, there are writers out there, I know. Sometimes it comes to you, sometimes it doesn't. So between a day and a couple of months, he'd write a chapter. He'd snail mail it to Jim and I. So, and we came to call that, hey, the pony stopped by today, he's on the way to your house. So the Pony Express. So we'd get every chapter, proof it, make notes, maybe change a storyline here and there, email it back, and just for me, because I did the slides, I'd read it through once. I like to have it in my hands. I can't read on a tablet or a Kindle, so, and I like to make notes. So I'd read it through fast and then go through a couple more times with a more critical eye. Minimum of 1 rewrite with the changes on each chapter, and lather, rinse, repeat for every chapter. Editor would get, Dennis would get the book package, Roger makes the changes, and then we get the proof hard copy, and this is just a proof hard copy. The back cover is wrong. In fact, we didn't know, but this is book 2, and it's a proof, and Jim and I are both in the process of reading that for the final time. And then we'll make changes to that if they're needed, send them back to Roger and Russ, the printer, and then final changes are made and we do the first printing. So that's the way we did it. Don't know if it's the right way, but it's the way we did it. And I think the final product turned out really, really nice. A little bit about what we went through. What do we do now? Do we get it published? We don't know how to do this. So I kind of took on the task of, well, you know, I'll probably have to send it to 3 people and then we'll be on Good Morning America. You know how that works. But every publisher, every agent has submission guidelines, and that is if they take submissions at all, and most don't. Over half, I would say. So you have to vet who you want to send it to. Everyone wants something different. They want 3 pages, they want 5 chapters, they want bios, they don't want bios, they want pictures. It's all different. So every packet took some time. Submitted about 20, well over 20 actually, and got 6 replies. Most of them were thanks, but no thanks. I had one guy really interested, loved what he read, but he was looking for, I don't want to call it a MASH book, but more of a experiences of a medic in World War II is really what he wanted to work with. So he was looking for this. He loved ours, but so we decided to self-publish. And it's worked really well with the editor and Russ. It will be coming out on Amazon shortly. We're jumping through hoops. Jim is jumping through hoops. It's significant what you have to do for Amazon to get on there, but that's almost ready. And then the self-imposed requirements in that we decided we wanted to, for sure, form an LLC. We're waiting on the state for that, and hire a CPA to keep track of this and so on. So that's the way we did it. There's the B25. There's the nose art.
I see on the
It's not
side
gonna
there.
work.
Did that come?
Oh, it doesn't show on the screen.
Yeah.
There's the nose art that we're talking about, and I'll show you a few more, but that's rubber ducky. As
One
you
thing
can
you might want to point out is, we were talking about the amazing firepower of this has. These are 8 50 caliber machine guns in the nose, and then on the side blister, she's got 2 on each side. So those are all facing forward at the same target, focused out about, I don't know, 300 yards, something like that. And then the top turret can be locked to fire forward as well. So you have a ship coming in on a target with 8,
12,
14 guns firing forward. And then there were other attachments where guns could go into the wings, but there were ships very like this actually used. I mean, this is not something we made up. These ships existed.
This was the J model from North American, basically. And in the book, we call it the predecessor of the J model. And we cover, with North American factory, just what we went through to build this airplane as it was, how we changed it after some battle had happened to the airplane, how to make it better for the crews. So all that's in there.
That looks like a tail gunner there too, right?
There is a twin 50s in the tail, and you'll see that in the next video. If you pay attention, there's a tail gun. There were also attachments, ball turret underneath on some of these models, so you could have 250s that would swivel underneath to protect the underside of the aircraft. So you could have, I guess, up to 20 or 22 50 cals.
How many in the crew?
Yeah.
Well, an actual B-25 crew, bomber crew, there were 6. Okay, there were waist gunners, tail gunners, bombardier, navigator, 2 pilots, so there were 6. The way we crew this in the book is 3. A pilot, a flight officer or co-pilot, and then and navigator. He's also the navigator, the co-pilot. And then the third guy, Petty Rogers, was in the ball turret, radio operator, top turret gunner. So we operated with a crew of 3.
Is that the same as the B-24? It looks like it. But outfitted with different munitions?
Totally different aircraft.
It is?
Totally different aircraft,
It's a
right.
medium bomber as opposed to a heavy bomber.
B-24 had 4 engines.
Didn't it have the same tail
Had twin
configuration?
tails. I believe the B-24 had twin tails
Yeah, that's what I thought.
and 4 engines. This is
Oh,
a
yeah.
smaller aircraft, more on a configuration of maybe an A-26, an attack aircraft. But they saw what this could do as far as a ground support aircraft and built the J model just for that, with all these guns. And that's what we used in ROORD, was the predecessor to the J model. So it's a smaller airplane than B-24. And I'm sorry, I think this is a cool looking airplane, a pretty airplane. I think the B-24 is ugly, but.
This was also the one that Jimmy Doolittle's guys used to fly off the aircraft carrier and attack Pinko. That was the B-25, because it was a small enough aircraft that although it looked like it overwhelmed the flight deck, they managed to get it on the aircraft carrier and take off from the
They
carrier.
had, how many, 17 of them?
Yeah.
Something like that, on an aircraft carrier that took off, flew to Japan.
Did they also land on it?
No, it was a one-way ticket.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had to ditch, crash land, be captured.
Wow.
Yeah, that's tough.
Really?
Yep.
Way back.
If you Google Jimmy Doolittle aircraft carrier, read the story. It's incredible what those guys did. So they made almost 11,000 of these. There's the dimensions and speed. The range, I went online on one of my pilot things and figured, okay, what's 1350? Seattle to Oklahoma City, 1,350 miles, just to give you an idea. Or round trip to San Francisco out of Seattle. Excuse me. So nose art, this is Jim's baby. He did all the nose art for these. We had originally 7 aircraft.
Yeah.
So I've just brought up 4 of them. You can kind of figure out what each one might be. Rubber Ducky's the first one. That was airplane number 1 that our crew got to name and design the logo for. Lucky Duck, you're probably thinking, what would that look like? Well, there you go. Devil Duck.
Now, these were real,
Nope.
no.
This is fictional.
Well, what were the real ones like?
The real ones, I should have a slide. Some of them are not for mixed companies somehow, should I say. They were generally beautiful women sitting in a pose, and Memphis Belle, have you ever seen the movie Memphis Belle? They had one of a girl like that.
Oh, so
And
they didn't use the ducks?
they didn't use the ducks. We used the ducks. But we wanted to put some nose art on them and keep it nice. So,
There's a lot of other nose art though that uses animals.
Right.
It's not- yeah, so it's not all.
yeah, it isn't all.
Yeah.
So Devil Duck, I love the eyes, by the way, Jim, red eye. And Just Ducky, that's one of my favorites. Just Ducky. I love that. So I think this is the other video. It's a little bit longer, but you can get a look at, and this is why I put it right after the nose art. You can look at some of the nose arts that we used in the book, Devil Duck and Lucky Duck and so on, under the pilot's window and co-pilot's window. And you can look at the tail gun, turret, and count guns as you go around the aircraft. Rachel, can you turn it up just? Yeah. So as you can see, you could see the tail gun position there with the 250s in it and some of the nose art. And I love the music. I think he did a good job of putting that together.
His name is actually, his nickname is Too Fun, so his
Too
nickname,
Fun.
yeah,
Ted Too Fun
Ted.
Wolf.
Wolfgang.
Wolfgang.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. And I have not met Ted yet. Have you?
No, we haven't met him.
Yeah, but he's one of the many behind-the-scenes people who've helped out with this. So I have one more reading. It's shorter than the first. It's pretty short. Nurse Barbara. We're all fictional characters, right? But Nurse Barbara, right there. Here's the setup. Reuben James has some wounds that Barbara's not quite sure
No, no.
what they are. And this is Jim's favorite part in the book. So this was up north, one of the fjords up by Norway, on one of the missions where Reuben James ended up in the water in a life raft and came back with some wounds. You didn't know I was going to read this.
Not this one, no, I know.
Nurse Barbara Robbins gently swabbed the stitches with iodine. Reuben James held his breath and closed his eye against the penetrating sting, wanting to look manly in front of the nurse. James's stoicism was being tested, however, by an impending moment of truth. Nurse Barbara was asking how he got his wounds, some 70 stitches worth. "I've never seen shrapnel patterns like this," she said. "They come from every angle and have impact of varying depth. It's more like a series of strikes than the normal one-shot blow. What hit you?" She dabbed a few more times at the set of stitches on James's right cheek, then capped the iodine and taped a fresh gauze pad in place. James replied with a subdued mumble. "Excuse me, Captain James, what did you say?" asked Nurse Barbara, turning from her task to give her full attention to him. "Seagull. I had a banana. We had a fight," mumbled James. "Seagull," she said. "Banana? You had a fight with a seagull over a banana?" James hung his head. "I was on a life raft," and Nurse Barbara interrupted. "You were on a life raft? You were shot down," she said. "No, not exactly," mumbled James. "I fell off a seaplane." "You fell off your seaplane and met a seagull with which you fought over a banana. Am I following correctly so far?" Nurse Barbara said. "Well, it's not exactly that simple," sputtered James. "Captain James," smiled Nurse Barbara, "you have numerous deep gouges over your entire head, over 50 stitches worth, and you have another 20-some stitches closing equally deep tears on your hands and forearms. Those wounds cost you almost 2 pints of blood. In addition, you have bad bruises on your entire upper body. You're telling me that you incurred these wounds defending a banana against a seagull?" James squirmed in humiliation, now wishing that he had outright lied about the whole matter from the beginning. Nurse Barbara laid a hand on his leg and leaned forward, one conspirator to another. "Captain," she said softly, "is there anything else you might want to tell me?" "No," said James in a small whisper. "I guess that about covers it." "Not even about how you helped save the lives of almost 30 men? And about your resourcefulness when you were accidentally left behind? And about your fellow crew members who recovered you and rushed you here? Wouldn't you like to tell me about those things too?" James looked up. Nurse Barbara looked down at him. Her eyes were warm. "Captain James," she said, 6 months ago my husband was killed in a bombing raid over Cambridge. His glassworks were hit as sudden as that, he was gone. I have been carrying grief like a dark weight. Please forgive my perverse British sense of humor, but the vaudeville image of a man fighting a seagull over a banana has shown me the first light I have seen in a long time. I will mourn my husband's death until my last day, but today I feel ready to have a suitable chat. Buy me a drink. May I invite you to do the honors? Can I bring bananas, he said. Oh, Captain James, you can bring all the bananas in the world, said Nurse Barbara. So that's
Yeah.
Reuben and Barbara.
As we were writing this and we were receiving these initial attempts at the next chapter, and he was asking for our suggestions, we were always more than willing and able to submit ideas from one of our buddies getting it somehow in the next chapter. So I don't remember who proposed this one, but it wasn't me.
So yeah, Reuben James, Ward Davidson, the third crew member obviously is Skip Petty Rogers. So Jim's right. Reuben and Ward kept getting the brunt of everything in the book that went wrong. So Jim and I conspired, and I actually wrote a chapter. And it's not in the book. I don't know. Maybe we'll put it as an epilogue in the final
I
book
know.
or
Second
something.
edition.
The website. We'll put it on the website.
I wrote a book in which, a chapter in which Skip Petty Rogers got his. And I wrote it in Rogers' style, using the base, using the airplane, and I won't give it away, but Skip Petty Rogers got his in the end of that chapter. So I mailed it in the same envelope that he mails chapters to us, so we got him. Oh, I mentioned that, you know, I wanted to convey how this book kind of felt to me anyway. And the only way I could do that is kind of compare it to some of the movies that I've seen, and I'm sure some of you have seen these movies. And no, he hasn't called yet, but actually Justin, Roger's grandson, apparently has a friend of a friend of a cousin of a friend who flies the private jet for Steven Spielberg. So we're hoping he has a copy now. Darkest Hour, anybody seen that movie? Great movie. Came out in 2017. Showed Winston Churchill incredibly well. In fact, Gary Oldman, I think, was the actor, received Best Actor for that.
Yes.
Did an incredible job. And in the book, there are scenes with Winston Churchill that are spot on, spot on. I read the book, it's called The Last Lion. It's about 9 million pages, and it's like reading a washing machine repair manual. It's a little dry, but it's a biography on Winston Churchill, and all the people around him and how he operated. And Roger, in fact, read that book twice. He loved it. But Darkest Hour, it conveys the war gravity and the realities of war. Dunkirk came out in the same year, another great movie. Combat aviation was shown in that somewhat to the way this book does, but the realities of war. So this book kind of has that feel to it. Memphis Belle, I mentioned. One of my all-time favorite movies. I just love World War II aviation. This was a B-17 crew with real nose art and aircrew camaraderie that exists. I flew in the Air Force in Special Operations Unit in a C-141. We flew with hard crews, which is what this book does. That is, it's always the same crew, and they're like your brothers. And the camaraderie and relationship that you grow with these air crews is incredible. And this book has that, and so did Memphis Belle. Who hasn't seen MASH, right? Kind of a lot of the same military situational humor. There's a lot of that in the book, satire. And then this isn't a military movie, but it's an aviation movie. It's a little bit off center, And not a lot of people have heard about it or seen it, but it's a great movie starring Richard Dreyfuss, is that right?
Doing good, man.
And it's about firefighting, fire bombing, and they use an A-26 aircraft mostly for that. But it's about the combat aviation mindset, mission mindset.
And some of you guys that are familiar with World War II movies will know this was taken from a World War II movie called A Guy Named Joe with Spencer Tracy and Ward Bond. They flew B-25s when the movie started out. Interesting little sci-fi.
And actually, always, a lot of the flight scenes was filmed over at Ephrata Airport here in Washington. The big hangar and all of that. So at the bottom there, that's the email address you can write to get in touch with us or make an order. You can look on Amazon, just do a search for R.O.O.R.D, and if it's come out, you'll get it, I'm sure. But we're happy to take questions. Jim's going to dance if you'd like.
Well, let's watch that.
But that's it. I thank you for your attention. And